Good afternoon, those of you here in the chapel, as well as those who are watching on Zoom, or of course those of you who might be tuning in to the videos later on after they have been posted. I'm happy to let you all know that the videos are now not only on YouTube, but also on the Adena intranet site, AdenaNet, under the Chaplaincy Services page. That can be found when you go to the home page of the new AdenaNet site. At the very top there is a tab, Information and Resources. If you click on that tab, you'll see just underneath there the Chaplaincy Services tab, and then once you're into the chaplain site, then you'll see over on the right hand side, I believe, a link that has all the videos there. So now there are a couple of different ways that you can access the videos that we record each and every day for our sessions. So with that, by way of announcement, I am really excited about this week's lessons. We are transitioning to the law of respect, and we're looking at our first female leader, Deborah, who is kind of obscure in the sense that there's only a couple of chapters in the book of Judges that are written about her. But Deborah just is a wonderful, wonderful example of the leadership law that we are looking at this week. That's called the law of respect. Now, this is week 7 of our 21-week journey, which means that after this week, we will be a third of the way done with our leadership journey. And so it has been so exciting and so honoring, really, just an honor to share this journey with all of you. And I hope it's added value to you. That's been my goal, my prayer. And so let's look today and for the next 5 days at the life of Deborah. Her story is found in the book of Judges, and we're looking at chapter 4, the entirety, 24 verses, and then the next chapter, Judges chapter 5, with verses 1 through 9 and verse 31. Judges 5 is actually a song that Deborah composed as a result of the battle that is described in the 4th chapter. And so with that as a biblical foundation, Judges 4, the whole chapter, and the first 9 verses of chapter 5, and then verse 31 of chapter 5, that's really the entire account that we have for Deborah. But despite the fact that Deborah doesn't get a whole lot of ink, if you will, in that she has 1 complete chapter and only 10 verses of the next, Deborah is a shining example of this law of respect, and that God is no respecter of persons. And so with that in mind, let's drill down a little bit into the 7th law of leadership, talking about the law of respect. And so the law of respect, people don't follow others by accident. They follow individuals whose leadership they respect. The less skilled follow the more highly skilled and gifted. When people get together for the first time as a group, take a look at what happens. As they start interacting, the leaders in the group immediately take charge. At first, people may make tentative moves in several different directions. But after the people get to know one another, it doesn't take long for them to recognize the strongest leaders and to follow them. So picture yourself in a group. Maybe it's the first time this group has gotten together, and you see this principle in action where people will spend a little bit of time getting to know each other, maybe some tentative moves, but it doesn't take long for the leaders to assert themselves. One TV show that kind of illustrates this is Survivor. If you are familiar with the show Survivor, often at the beginning there are 2 or 3 different groups that are called tribes, and they get together and begin to get to know each other and hopefully try to find out their strengths and weaknesses. But it's not very long after the introductions begin that you begin to notice kind of a pecking order, and you see the people that tend to assert themselves. So it illustrates when you see that happen every time there's a new episode or a new season of Survivor. You see this principle in play as well, in terms of what we noted earlier, that the less skilled follow the more highly skilled when it comes to leadership. And again, that's just kind of common sense. If you were wanting to repair an item, let's say, you would probably follow another person who knew a whole lot more about that particular repair job than you know yourself. And so this issue of the law of respect is really important. And as we're about to find out, Deborah earned the respect of everyone she came into contact with. But we don't want to get ahead of ourselves today. We first want to pause and consider once again at the start of our week 7, our leadership thought for today. And it says this: when a leader gains respect, leading becomes easier. Let me say that again. When a leader gains respect, leading becomes easier. Doesn't that make sense to you? Because the more a leader is respected, the more likely people are to follow. And obviously, leading becomes easier when you have people who follow. And so this leads us then into some introductory material on the life of Deborah. This, of course, comes from our scripture passages. That's why it's always helpful, not mandatory, but certainly helpful, if you have an opportunity to read through those chapters in the Bible ahead of time, over the weekend or even on Monday, to give the foundation to our weekly studies. And so from Judges chapter 4 and 5, we are introduced to this person, Deborah. And so a few points here that kind of describe her background. Deborah is described in chapter 4 of the book of Judges as both a prophet and a judge, which is exactly how Samuel would later on become known. And we, of course, studied the life of Samuel when we looked at the law of E.F. Hutton. And so, in other words, Deborah held the highest leadership position in Israel in her time. Now, as a woman, Deborah's rise to this level of leadership was really unprecedented. It would have been extremely rare in those times, very paternalistic, that men would want to follow, let alone choose to follow, the leadership of a woman. Nevertheless, she not only had influence with the people, she also earned their respect. And I should probably share that last phrase, she earned their respect. Respect is always earned, it's not given. A leader must earn the people's respect. So here's a kind of a key point that we want to share at the outset that helps flesh out this principle of influence and respect. Excuse me. It goes like this: influence causes people to begin to follow a leader, but respect keeps people following a leader. Did you get the contrast there? So influence will start that journey of people following a leader, but it's not enough to keep them there. And we have to add respect to influence. That's what will keep people following that leader. This statement describes so beautifully the power of the law of respect. So as we dig just a little bit more deeply then into Deborah, we find that she was universally respected. As a prophet of the Lord, Deborah led a life worthy of respect. As a prophet, she had to be in tune with God. She had to spend time seeking God, because the role of a prophet was to basically be God's spokesperson, to announce God's judgments or his decisions or what was going to happen. So in order for someone to serve as a prophet, they had to be close to God. They had to have cultivated a relationship with God. And so Deborah, when we're introduced to her, we don't know anything about her childhood, her upbringing, or anything like that. Scripture only introduces us to Deborah when she's already an adult and she's already in this role of a prophet. And so it says, though, to us, it reminds us, and certainly when you look at the song in chapter 5, it too, as you read that, you can't help but come to the conclusion that she had a very close relationship with God, and the spillover of that relationship with God, that's what enabled her to produce those words of the song there in chapter 5. So as a prophet, Deborah led a life worthy of respect. Now, in addition to her role as a prophet, she was also a judge. So as Samuel was, as Samson was, who we studied last week, the role of a judge was somewhat a blend of a military leader and a judge as we normally think, someone who would decide cases. And so she was a civil and a military leader in a day when men generally didn't follow the woman's leadership, but they did her. In fact, Deborah, we read in chapter 4, she called out the man who was a military leader and ordered him to carry out God's divine mandate to go to war. This leader's name was Barak, and when we read through chapter 4, we discover that he told her, I'll go, I'll obey this command, but only under one condition. And that is, you have to go with me. I won't go unless you go with me, he said. So she did go. Of course, we learn from the text that she said, because that you answered in this way, the glory that you would have gotten had you just obeyed completely, it's going to go to another person who also happened to be a woman. And so we see even here Deborah earning the respect. The fact that as a judge, people would come to her, the scripture tells us that she lived in the mountains of Ephraim, so that people would literally have to exert quite a bit of effort just to get to her. She used to sit there in the mountains of Ephraim, and people would literally come up to her to get her opinion. And the entire nation, the children of Israel, sought her out for judgment. So this afternoon, and again, we're just basically introducing Deborah today. So I'd like to share this statement from John Maxwell's book, The 21 Most Powerful Minutes in a Leader's Day. That's been our resource for this study. Again, I highly encourage you all to pick this book up. You might also want to pick up the book that precedes this, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, which this book, 21 Most Powerful Minutes in a Leader's Day, is based on the former, the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. So Deborah had the respect of everyone. Even Israel's greatest military leader, Barak, followed her. He had so much respect for her that he wanted her by his side as they went into battle. So Deborah was honored as a prophetess. She was respected as a leader. And the Bible tells us that she restored prosperity to the people for 40 years because of her leadership. They had been under bondage for 20 years. She then established prosperity or restored prosperity to the people for a period of 40 years. The people expressed their esteem for her by giving her the highest compliment that they could imagine at that point in time, when they called her a mother to the entire nation of Israel. And so as we bring today's lesson to a conclusion, we always end basically the same way, certainly on Monday through Thursday, and that is that we pose a question for you to reflect on, to think about. Today's question for reflection is this: is it getting easier or harder or more difficult to get people to follow you? Does it come more naturally? So again, let me rephrase. Is it getting easier or more difficult to get people to follow you? With that, we, of course, pray God's blessing on you. We thank you for following along and taking this journey with us. We're almost a third of the way in, and tomorrow we'll get a deeper dive into Deborah's story and how and why she earned respect. And we're in for a great week this week. So we just pray God's blessing on you and have a wonderful rest of the day. We'll look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow at 3:30. God bless you.